My alarm clock made an irritating beeping, buzzing, screeching sound on the nightstand next to my bed. What the hell? Miserable piece of... I said as I fumbled for the snooze button. It seemed as if I had just managed to get to sleep a few minutes earlier, and here was that miserable misbegotten lump of electronics and plastic making its nerve-jarring racket that was pulling me from my much-needed sleep. When the momentary amnesia that accompanies first waking passed, I remembered, this was the day the whole team had been waiting for. More to the point, it was the day that I'd been waiting for more so than the rest of the team. 5 years ago, I was selected by Timetronics Incorporated to work with a group they had studying time transport. The first day on the project, we all got together and drew straws to see who would be the first person to travel through time. I was the one that drew the short straw. It was an icebreaker to get us together as a team, and at the time we all considered it a joke. The rest of the team kidded me for 4 years about where they were going to send me if we ever did get the process to work. Then, after 4 years of hard work and long hours, it began to look like it was actually going to happen. It wasn't a joke anymore. Another year later, the transport worked, or at least we were pretty sure that it worked. I would get to tell the rest of the team if it really did. That is, I would tell them if I was transported into the past and if I made it back again to tell the story. A couple of very large ifs. That's why I was still tired. I had tossed and turned most of the night trying to get to sleep, and, as usual, whenever I'm excited or on edge about something, I can't sleep. Anyway, I dragged myself out of bed and hit the shower. I didn't want to go into the past with body odor. You never know just who you will run into. And who I would run into was exactly what I was thinking about as I showered. When we discovered how to time transport and how to choose a year and an approximate date, I had to choose when I wanted to go to. I had chosen to visit my childhood hometown around the time my parents were married. I really wanted to see them just after they were married to see what their life was like. I have to admit that even though I was forbidden to have any contact during my visit, I was hoping that I might be able to change things just a little. I thought that if I could see how they were back then, that I might be able to do or say something that would change how I grew up, and that maybe my parents wouldn't have divorced. Maybe my childhood would have been happier. Maybe I could have had a father around to do things with instead of him being at work 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. I look back now and think he did that to avoid the conflict at home, but he also avoided his wife and children. After my shower and shave, I got dressed in the clothes selected for the trip: pair of period jeans, a plaid flannel shirt, and leather shoes. If I was seen, I didn't want to attract any undue attention by wearing current-day clothing. When I finished dressing, I took one last look around the house. I wanted to make sure I had done the things on my list before I left the house. Everything was locked up and put away, the blinds were drawn, and the perishable foods were removed from the house. The bills were paid, the mail was on hold, and the newspapers were stopped. I had prepared for this trip just like any long trip or vacation because I didn't really know how long I would be gone. For that matter, I wasn't sure if I would even be returning. If all went as planned, I would be back home tonight at the usual time regardless of how long I spent in the past, but there was no way to be sure. This was the first time. We didn't know anything about time transfer or its effects yet. I walked to the front door to leave. On the table just inside the door, I placed an envelope with Mary Ellen Newhouse McNeil, my sister's name, written on it. Inside were explicit instructions, my will, power of attorney, and other information she would need to settle my estate if it came to that. It was time. I took one last look around and went out and locked the door. My mind was a mess of conflicting thoughts as I drove to the lab. It's amazing that I made it without having an accident, considering that I don't remember a moment of the trip. When I arrived, they were all ready for me. The transfer computer was programmed to the date and coordinates that I had requested, and the transfer module was checked out, warmed up, and ready for me to enter. All that was left was for me to say my goodbyes, shake some hands, and make a profound statement to be misquoted later in the history books. My associates wished me good luck. Jennifer gave me a big hug and a kiss and said, "John, when you get back, you and I are going to have a very private celebration." Know what I mean? She smiled, and I knew what she meant. Jim, the project manager, shook my hand and gave me a pat on the shoulder but said nothing. With all said and done, I stepped into the module and watched as the door swung shut and sealed itself. I thought, this is it. There's no backing out now. I had a feeling right then that was probably similar to the feelings the first astronauts had, except I was going to move through time rather than space. Then there was a slight buzzing and the light dimmed in the module, and I knew I was on my way. If all went as planned, I would find myself standing in the front yard about 25 feet from my old house. There was a spectacular light show, as if I was standing inside a 4th of July fireworks display, and then everything went dark. I was totally disoriented, slightly off balance and dizzy. I was trying very hard to keep from falling over. I put my arms out looking for something to support myself when I felt a wall. I steadied myself and just stood there with my eyes closed for a while until everything stopped spinning. When I had regained my equilibrium, I slowly opened my eyes again. There was nothing but total darkness. I thought I was blind. I turned my head left and then right. I slowly turned around, and then I saw a slight glow. I looked at it and realized it was a window, and I was seeing outside light coming in. It was night. We hadn't discussed that possibility, but of course it could happen. We couldn't control the exact date, and we certainly couldn't control the time of day. But I was inside. I was supposed to be in the front yard, not in the house. Did I even have the right house? I stood and waited for my eyes to adjust from the fireworks to the total darkness of the house. As they made their adjustment, I started to look more closely. There was the hutch standing next to the door to the kitchen. There was the table and the chairs. I recognized these. Not only from memory, but because I had these pieces of furniture in my dining room at home. I had completely refinished them when I got them after Mom and Dad divorced. I moved over to the kitchen door and into the kitchen. It was total darkness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my lighter. I made a mental note to include a mini mag light for future trips. I looked around the kitchen and saw a calendar on the wall. March of the year I was born. I was in the house I grew up in 9 or 10 months before I was born and 2 months after Mom and Dad were married. The lighter got hot, so I put it out and waited till my eyes readjusted again to the darkness. Then I moved back into the dining room and across to the hallway door. I wanted to see what time it was, and I knew the grandfather's clock was in the hallway. I stood at the door to the hallway and listened. I could hear familiar sounds coming from upstairs. I had made those sounds late at night, in the dark, with my ex-wife. I smiled. Mom and Dad were doing the antler dance upstairs. I was going to have to get out of the house and wait outside till daylight. I started to move into the hall, but my foot caught on something and I fell flat on my face with a loud thud that shook the entire house. I forgot that there was a step up into the hallway. I heard panicked voices coming from upstairs. I heard Dad say the word shotgun. Now I panicked. To leave the house now would leave me in the open outside. To stay here would get me shot for sure, knowing Dad. I suddenly remembered my old hiding place under the stairs and crawled quickly to the hidden panel. I removed the boards, slid back in under the stairs, and replaced the panel from the backside. It was a lot tighter fit than I remembered. I knew I was safe here because Dad didn't even discover this secret place until I was about 5 years old. I heard footsteps coming cautiously down the stairs and moving around the house. I could see the lights come on through cracks in the boards and the steps. My heart was racing. It was just like when I hid here as a kid from my parents to avoid a punishment. In a way, it was exactly the same, only the punishment would be far more severe than anything I would have received as a child. Then I heard Dad's voice on the phone. "Yeah, Stu? This is Harvey. I think I have or had someone in my house. I can't find him right now. Can you get over here to look around?" "Good. I'll wait for you." Stu was the chief of police in our town at that time. He showed up with 2 officers about 15 minutes later. That was just great. Now the entire West Coldridge police force was there. I stayed curled up in a ball under the stairs for what seemed like hours until the police had done a search of the entire farm and surrounding area and declared it safe to return to bed. After they left, the lights went out and Dad returned upstairs to where Mom was still waiting for him. She never did come down through the whole thing. As he went up the stairs, he said, "Are you still ready, honey? We could take up where we left off." I decided to wait right where I was until they were done and asleep this time. Then I would return to the place I had arrived and activate the transfer again. I had enough for this trip. The experiment was a success even if my mission was a failure. I must have dozed for a while waiting for them to finish their dance. When I woke up, I listened carefully and could hear Dad's familiar snoring. I smiled and thought, so he even snored when he was this young. I carefully removed the panel, making sure I made no noise whatsoever, and crawled slowly out of my hiding place. I felt really strange and figured at the time that it was because I was curled up in that small place for about 5 hours. I replaced the panel and crawled back into the dining room. I didn't want to stand up because I was feeling strange. My body was having very unfamiliar feelings when I moved, and I figured that if I kept low to the floor, I had a better chance of making it quietly. I went to the exact location that I had arrived and slowly stood up. I was thinking, boy, 5 hours in a cramped space will do really strange things to how your body feels. When I was upright, I reached in my pocket for the control. It was hard because my jeans seemed like they had shrunk since I put them on. I could hardly get my hand into my pocket. When I finally did, I pushed the button, and a few seconds later the light show started again. The next thing I knew, I was in the familiar surroundings of the module. I heard the hermetic seal break and saw the door swing open. I heard the shouts of joy from the lab and saw the excited faces of my cohorts as the door finished its travel. Jim was the first to get to me, and he grabbed me and planted a big juicy kiss on my lips, and his tongue penetrated my mouth. When he broke off the kiss, he whispered in my ear, "When we finish the debriefing, we have a date, remember? I plan to send you on another trip, but you will only feel like you left this time period." I was shocked by his actions and wanted to punch his lights out, but before I could, he pulled me out the door of the module to the rest of the waiting crew. They all shouted at me, "Good going, Mary," and "Way to go, girl." It was then that I knew what the strange feelings were that I had been experiencing after I woke up under the stairs. I looked down at myself, and it was obvious that I wasn't John anymore. I was Mary. I was female. But how could this happen? Did time travel cause genetic change in the traveler? No, that couldn't be. They obviously all knew me as a female when I left. But I knew that I was a male. Yes, I was most definitely a man when I left. So how did the change happen? I was feeling weak and lightheaded and needed to sit down away from the crowd. The things they were saying were all a blur. I told them that I needed to sit in private for a while. Jim took me to his office, closed the door, sat me on his couch and sat down next to me. I looked at him completely confused and started to cry. I don't know why, I just did. It felt like what I needed to do right then. He held me close and let me finish. It felt good to have him holding me. When I was done and feeling a bit better, I looked at him and said, "We need to talk. We really need to talk. You're not going to believe what I'm going to say, but you need to listen to me before you say anything." I composed myself. I was a scientist capable of detachment from personal feelings. I most definitely needed to be detached right at that moment. I took a deep breath and started in. Okay, first, how long was I gone? Jim told me I was absent from the module for about 5 minutes and that he assumed I was in the past for about 5 hours. We had programmed the computer so that for every hour that a person was gone, 1 minute would pass at the lab. This was to provide a safe gap to prevent a person from coming back before they left and to provide a small guide to those in the lab as to how long the person was spending in another time period. I told him, fine. That calculation works out as we planned. I have a couple more questions, and don't question my questions right now. What is my full name? How long have you known me? What do you know of my past? Jim looked at me and said, all right. I won't ask any questions, but you are definitely going to answer some later. Your name is Mary Ellen Newhouse. You're 34 years old. I've known you for the 5 years of this project. I know that you were born in a small farm town in northern New Jersey and went to college in New York and have a master's in electrical engineering. You were married in college, no children, and the guy left you for someone else just before you started working with us here. You took back your maiden name when you divorced, and I don't know what your married name was. Do you need more details? Then as far as you know, I have always been Mary Ellen Newhouse. I have always looked as I do now, and I have always been female. Right? Of course you have. What kind of crazy questions are those? Jim said. I told him that I would explain as best as I could. I again told him to remain silent while I talked, and then I told him that as far as I was concerned, I had spent my whole life as John Henry Newhouse, male electrical engineer. The rest of what he told me was correct except for the gender. I told him that when I entered the module about 30 minutes ago, I was a male, not a female. That somehow the time transport had changed my gender. He had a look of shock on his face, and then I could see him thinking. He said, "That's not possible." Don't get me wrong, dear. I know you far too well to disbelieve what you say, but it's not possible for the transport process to change a person's gender. You went in female and you came out female as far as all here are concerned. Tell me what exactly took place while you were back there? Maybe there is a key to this there. I related the entire story just as I did above and tried to not leave out a single detail of my 5 hours in the past. I also told him why I had chosen that time and place and what I really intended to do when I was back there. Jim listened intently to every word I said, and when I finished he sat and appeared to be thinking for quite some time. Then he lifted his head and said, I believe you and I think I know what happened. Now it's your turn to sit and listen. Okay, you arrived inside the house you grew up in about 9 months before you were born, or, shall we say 3 trimesters? You disturbed your mother and father while they were having intercourse. After the disturbance you caused settled down, they resumed the activity they were engaged in before they were interrupted. Now, had you not disturbed them, they would have finished what they were doing, and the sperm that was to be would have fertilized your mother's egg, and 9 months later John Henry would have been born. But that didn't happen. That sperm cell remained inside your father and remained a part of the gene pool, so to speak. Later, when they resumed where they left off, many things had happened. Both your father and mother most likely had a massive adrenaline dump. The chemical balance of both their bodies was considerably different than before you fell on your face. When your father finally released his seed into your mother, many things were different. The chemistry of your mother's vagina and uterus was different. Your father's sperm mix was different. The timing of the act was different. The emotion of your parents was different. The sperm that fertilized the egg this time was female, and Mary Ellen was born 9 months later. You were wrong in what you intended to do, and you know it. We had reasons for establishing the parameters that we did for time transport. I think you have become the first example of what can happen if a seemingly minor event occurs as a result of a time visit. I just stared at him in utter disbelief. Could he be right? It did make sense. It was the only explanation that made sense right now. I looked at him and said, I have to go back and stop myself. I have to get everything back on track. I have to go back right now. Jim looked at me and said, You can't. Think about it. You're an intelligent person. If you go back and try to stop yourself, you will be there with yourself. One male and one female, but both the same person. What kind of paradox would that create? How would your male self react to you showing up and telling him what you've just told me? Consider the conditions at the time. Late at night, total darkness, not to mention your father and his shotgun. Then, as you well know, the odds of us being able to transport you to the exact same time and place a second time are astronomical. The process just isn't that refined yet. But we have to do something. I said. I can't stay like this for the rest of my life. Jim smiled at me and said, I think the best thing to do right now is for you to take the rest of the day off, go home, take a shower and get some rest. I'll tell the rest of the group and see what they can come up with. Do you feel well enough to go on your own, or do you want me to give you a lift? I told him that apart from being a woman, I was fine now and could make it on my own. We went back into the main lab and told the others that I was leaving. I headed for the door when Jennifer said, Here, Mary. Don't forget your purse. Oh yeah, thanks. I said. Jim. Would you walk with me out to the parking lot? Sure, Mary. He said as he walked over to the door. Once out of the lab, I told him I wasn't sure that my truck would be in the same spot or even the same truck. He looked at me and said, It isn't. You don't drive a truck. You drive a classic pink Mustang convertible, and it's over there. As we walked into the parking lot, I told him, You better come with me. I have no idea what else will be different, and I might need your help to ease me through this. I don't know if I even live in the same house now. I was worried what I would find. Everyone here knew me as I was now. I was the only one that knew what had happened and what I had been. It had to be because I was transported and they weren't. Jim said, Okay, I'll take my car. You follow me if you feel up to driving. I'll call the lab on my cell and tell them I'll be back later. As I walked to the pink Mustang convertible that Jim pointed out to me, I began to notice things about me that I hadn't taken the time to notice before. I walked different. There was a difference in my hip and leg motion, and there was the added weight that was bouncing on my chest. I couldn't stride across the lot like I was used to doing. I looked at my hands. They were much smaller and the nails were well manicured and had clear polish on them. I reached up and ran my fingers through my hair. I had always kept it fairly short, but now it was down past my shoulders. It was also brown where mine had been blonde. I needed a mirror. I got to my car and searched through my purse for my keys. I could see that I kept my purse as well organized as most women did. What a mess. What could I possibly need all that stuff for? I found the keys and got in. I started the car and then twisted the rearview mirror to look at my face. What I saw was basically my sister, and I always thought my sister was a good-looking woman. She looked like my mom, and I always wanted to find a woman just like my mom. I heard Jim honking his horn and came back to the problems at hand. I pulled out and followed him across town to my place. I pulled into the driveway and he pulled in behind me. I still lived in the same house, but it was white instead of the colonial blue with white trim that I had painted it when I moved in. Jim got out of his car and said, "Well, same place?" I told him that it was, but with a different paint job. He asked if I wanted him to come in with me, and I said that I did. We went in through the front door and I looked around. The envelope was still on the table where I left it, but it had 2 names on it now. John Henry Newhouse and Nicholas Harvey Newhouse. I had 2 brothers? What happened to my sister? I opened the envelope and read my letter. I told them to tell Mom and Dad what had happened as best they could. My dad was still alive? He had died in a car crash when he was on his way to pick me up at a Boy Scout camp. But if I wasn't a Boy Scout, then he didn't go. He was still alive. There was never an accident. And Mom and Dad were still married? My head was spinning. I went in to sit at the dining room table, but that was different too. I never got my parents' old table and hutch when they divorced because they didn't divorce. I started to the living room to sit but never made it. The next thing I knew, I was laying on the couch looking up at Jim. He helped me sit up and I began to tell him what I had found out. I said, if I do find a way to go back to my life as I remember it, I will lose a brother I never had, my parents will have gotten divorced, and worst of all, my father will be dead from a car accident. Jim looked at me and said, there's a lot more, but I'm not sure you're ready for it right now. I told him I needed to know as much as possible right now. He said, okay. If you're really sure. I said I was. He started in, your brothers are both married and John has 4 children. Nick has 3. You are crazy about all of the kids and plan to have some of your own. Your mother and father are both still alive and they live just down the street 3 houses over. They are very happy together. And I may as well lay this on you too, because you will find out if you spend much more time in this house. I live here with you. I moved in 2 years ago. And there's one more thing. You put a note on my desk this morning that I found after you left. You didn't want to tell me because you knew I wouldn't let you go if I knew. Hang on, kid, 'cause here it comes. You're 2 months pregnant. For the second time in my life, I passed out. Jim was holding my hand when I came to. I was again lying on the couch. He kept me lying down when I tried to get up. No. You need to just lie there and catch up with everything I've just told you. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in your shoes, and I hope I never find out. We talked for several more hours, and then Jim took me to the bedroom and helped me get undressed, into a pair of pajamas and into bed. Jim did allow me a quick glance in the sliding mirror doors of the closet, and it was a good thing he was holding me. He gave me some sleeping pills and stayed until I was asleep. Then he headed back to the lab to report what he knew of what had happened to me and the repercussions of my actions in the past. Even with the pills, I spent a fitful night and was dog-tired when I woke up in the morning. Jim was sitting in the chair next to my bed. He was wide awake and just waiting for me to wake up. He looked at me and said, "Feeling any better?" I told him I felt like death warmed over and had no idea what I was going to do. He said, "I may be able to make this a whole thing lot easier for you to make a decision. Two things have happened since your return. First, the project protocols were reviewed by the staff and it was decided that there is no way you will be permitted to even attempt to change what we all perceive to be the proper reality, even if it is not the reality that existed when you entered the module." I stood mute on the vote. Second, and maybe the more pertinent of the two, the project's primary benefactor, the organization that funded our research the last 5 years and that we all wanted to know who it was, arrived this afternoon. In accordance with our financing agreement, they were notified immediately upon your safe return. They have shut down the lab and restricted all personnel from entering. The project is closed until they do their review and maybe allow us to re-enter the lab to help them. They are the government. I don't know which branch or organization, but I have my suspicions and you don't want to mess with them. You mean that what you see is what you get? I'm stuck this way regardless of what I decide. He nodded in the affirmative. That was 6 months ago and we still haven't been back into the lab. All of the other personnel have been assigned elsewhere and no longer work for Timetronics Incorporated. Jim and I are the only ones left and we are currently paid to stay available if needed. We got married 2 months ago and I am expecting next month. We were required to sign additional security agreements restricting our disclosure of the above information. That's why the above names, places, organizations, and everything else are fictitious. I am not even really the person that I portray myself to be in this story, so don't go after her. She didn't write this. Also, I am publishing on the web under a pseudonym so I can't be traced. Most importantly, let it be known that time travel is possible and that the ability is in the hands of your government. Think about it. If I changed my gender, my siblings, my parents' divorce, the death of my father and many other things that I haven't even mentioned merely by tripping over a step in the past, just think what they could do, or may have already done, on purpose. Or worse yet, by accident. Were you always male? Or female? Why are there so many people that have a deep-seated feeling that they are the wrong gender? Were they always the wrong gender? Was your sister always your sister? Think about it.